Hi everyone. Welcome to the best panel of today. If you guys are interested in crypto gaming or in crypto gaming, I think this is a really great panel to listen in on. We have Aleksander, one of the co-founders of Axie, arguably one of the games that trailblazed it for a lot of us, and as well as Piers from Delphi Digital, part of an extremely smart and sharp team of investors and builders. So, without further ado, let's kind of get into it. The topic is the dawn of Web3 gaming. I thought it'd be great to start off with a bit of a history. Alex, what was it like in 2018 to build in crypto gaming? And especially, how did it feel to raise in that time?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, I would say. I think we all came into the space very bullish about just NFTs in general, right? We came from, we hadn't made any games before, but we wanted to make games that used NFTs because we thought that, it's ideal for digital identity, and you can potentially bring your NFTs into other games sometime in the future, and also build an ecosystem around those game characters. But explaining that to the world at that time was almost impossible. So yeah, just going through those rounds, quite difficult. I think even at one point we had like 1 month left to live at the end of 2018, even before our token sale. So yeah, it was a very different environment, but oddly enough, where I see ourselves heading in right now is a little bit similar, right? Because if I go specifically into the AXS token sale, for example, a lot of people at the time, that was late 2019, like early 2020, is like people didn't believe in tokens at all. So kind of came to this, it had almost gone full circle from 2017, full on ICO, all kinds of tokens, and then 2018, 2019, oh, do you really need a token in your ecosystem? And I feel like we're getting there again this year, because you've had so many tokens that really don't have any specific use case, or they don't do anything, and everyone's just kind of launching something. So now it's going back to basics, like, do you need a token? When is a good time to launch a token? It's very similar questions that we had even back then in 2018, 2019.
Yeah, I mean, Delphi was one of the earliest investors in Axie, kind of believed in you guys before this whole bull run. Piers, when you guys invested in Axie, what was your thesis, and has that changed while watching the space and Axie evolve?
Yeah, so I think sort of Delphi's initial familiarity with Axie came from interesting enough, when the original sort of founders dropped out of Wall Street and started the research business, the first sort of paid research gig they did was a sort of landscape of crypto gaming. Of all the projects covered, 18 months later, the only one that actually hadn't only just survived, but still had a very engaged community was Axie. And so as a result, further down the line, actually, sort of Delphi ended up doing some work around the AXS governance token and sort of building, a relationship with the team through that. And so by the time the sort of, actual token raise came around, there was a lot of familiarity with the project and sort of the direction of travel. Again, we'd seen a super engaged community that we were very excited about, and the team had played a significant hand in building out that model, and therefore, we had a ton of comfort around that. And so, in terms of how the thesis has changed, I suppose, since then, obviously it's been incredible to reflect on what a sort of powerful journey it's been for Axie, and how it's kind of really obviously cast light on sort of how powerful this sector can be. But you asked Alex, what was it sort of like back then? It was very much crickets in the crypto gaming space, and obviously 2021 was an incredible year that kind of sort of, I guess, redefined sort of expectation. I think anyone that tells you back then that Alex might disagree, right? Because there's a sort of unwavering ambition and conviction. But anyone who really tells you that they sort of anticipated things happening that big, that soon back then is, it was difficult to see. But I think, having seen it evolve so dramatically, and obviously now Sky Mavis having a much sort of broader stance in the market, and not only having paved the way, but now sort of establishing infrastructure to try and support others is definitely great to see.
Yeah.
Actually, kind of riffing off that a little bit, when we look back at the original release of the Axie Classic game, which really hits the most traction, when we look at the quality of that game, it's actually one of the earlier experiments that we had. So after we shipped it to the market, we actually pretty quickly realized that this is probably not going to be the game that takes us mainstream. Just because the quality was not necessarily there, we didn't live operate it in the way that most normal Web2 games are live operated. But what actually made it work was the underlying community that we had built over 2.5 years before the game even launched. And then we also had a business model innovation with the 2-token model, which really kind of turned it into growth on overdrive. So then again, it was less about the game at that point and more about the community and the social fabric that surrounded Axie and still does today. So what we saw is that Axie Infinity kind of became a proxy for not only the card genre itself, but also, I would say, all different genres of games kind of collected into this one, because people really didn't have anything else to play than just Axie, right? So these games I guess people around the world, they have different tastes in games, right? They want to play FPS games, they want to play 4X land games, they want to play MMORPGs, right? So now we're starting to see more of these type of games come into the market. And then potentially like influencers who are playing Axie, they might actually want to play different type of games. For us, that's totally fine. When we're now releasing Axie Classic, like that's really the game that we have wanted to make for a long time, which is more similar to Hearthstone or Slay the Spire in mechanic-wise. We're very excited to see that launch more globally on app stores as well. So the Axie Classic game, for example, was never available on Google Play or even the iOS App Store. And even then, reaching like a 2.7 million daily active users, which we had at the peak, was it was interesting to see how far I think tokens can take a product if done somewhat correctly. Of course, you have to be very careful about how you tweak the tokens moving forward. Mm-hmm. But a lot of what we're doing here, and I think not only speaking from an Axie or Sky Mavis perspective, but many different game studios, is like we're experimenting. And I think we have to be very open about that as well. Like, so what is true product market fit, for example, if you have token issuance that again might give you false signals, for example. I think right now we have a general idea that people in the gaming market might want to own their game items. It seems clear. But what really found product market fit was people want to make money online. So that's no secret.
Don't we all? I think Axie is in a really interesting position, like you said, because you're evolving, you're constantly experimenting. But you're also one of the oldest experiments out there that are still alive. And then when you talk about designing your community, designing your 2-token model, are there any early decisions that you made that still really affect you today? And is there any advice you would give to game builders who are starting out as well?
Sure, yeah. So one of we have many, many learnings from the beginning. I mean, we've been building for 4.5, almost 5 years now, shipped many different type of games, and now building an entire ecosystem for our game and also for other game studios in the future. I think one of the early learnings that we had is, well, if you're going to ship a token, at least make sure that it makes sense, that you can actually benefit from the attention that it brings. So when we are talking to game studios, we have a very specific type of game studio we're looking for. Like, we want them to be mobile focused first. We don't want them to have any existing tokens in the market, so both fungible tokens and NFTs, because that actually is a liability from our perspective. The second product has shipped a token, it means that you have all these expectations from the community that, unless handled correctly, will turn into really a disaster down the line. Of course, they also need to be experienced founders and need to be able to take advice. But like those are generally the things that we look for. But that no token thing is quite important, and probably what I would advise most founders to kind of delay the token until the product is ready to benefit from the attention. And then eventually you have some good syncs and balances out. And I guess you guys at Delphi also have similar thoughts.
Totally, yeah, would absolutely echo that. I mean, you sort of alluded to earlier on about how back then everyone was kind of sort of sheepish about tokens, and we seem to be entering a period in the market again where there's some hesitance around it, not just from the sort of regulatory perspective where we've been getting some sort of pressure, but certainly, yeah, like our advice at the moment is that so for one, don't sort of underestimate, the significance of releasing a token and sort of the, I suppose, the complexity involved with managing sort of an open economy. And two is ensuring that all of the sort of anticipated roadmap items in terms of the kind of requisite sinks and offsets in the economy actually are ready to go when you think they will be. And if there's any semblance of doubt around that, it's better to err on the side of caution and sort of release slower. There are many ways in which you can still promise to reward for that activity without actually releasing it into the economy. One approach that you guys took at one point, even though I'm not sure actually how much knowledge there was around it beforehand, is obviously the sort of retroactive airdrop. The other approach is sort of releasing rewards that are effectively like locked in a contract, if you like, and they almost vest and unlock over time, but people can see what they're entitled to should they continue to play. And so there are ways to benefit from the effects of a token without actually having it in the wild and potentially causing damage if, again, certain aspects of the economy rollout or something like that are sort of delayed. So that's definitely the stance we're taking at the moment as well.
Yeah, and kind of the last point about token, if you're not too careful, you will attract the wrong community, right? I think we've all seen that, especially with the PFP kind of 10K hype. I think a lot of people are trying to experiment now with even giving it away. But the problem there is if you're not careful with rewarding the wrong people there too, it's like your giveaway is getting botted, right? So you actually, the real advice here is that you just have to get your hands dirty, do the work yourself. Talk to the community. Like literally, we spent 2 years doing unscalable things, talking to the real people in our community to make sure that they were there. And then that community is a big part of why when we got on board, or when we onboarded millions, is that how we could even make it work. So I would not advise having a Discord as the main centerpiece as you start really growing, because then again you get many middlemen scammers potentially who even try to take the narrative. So when I look back at what happened with Axie, a lot of the narrative actually shifted from the early community that we had, like the one that Delphi invested in is like there wasn't even any token there, any kind of ERC20 that people could earn. People were just excited about the game that we wanted to build. And then eventually, as we started releasing the token, you see that you get a different type of community that wants to come in and speculate. And that's totally fine if you can turn those users from speculators into the real community. But if you're not careful and you grow too fast, then suddenly the speculators become the educators. And that's a massive problem because the new community that then is coming after the speculators also become speculators. So you really need to pay close attention to that. And I think that's really a unique observation that we had with Axie.
Yeah, so you started losing control of your narrative and types of people that you brought into the game.
And I think it's a very easy attack vector for especially mainstream media, right? Because if they come in and see that, let's for example say that there are guilds, there are good guilds, I would say, that try to educate, that try to build communities, and you have more or less like the Sixers or in Ready Player One, like the bad guys, kind of that are only in it to extract a value from an ecosystem, and they go from game to game to game. It's very similar to what you would have in DeFi, except liquidity. You have people who are farming for you, and that suddenly can become very aggressive against those people who are in those guilds. So I don't want to call out any names because it doesn't really have any purpose, but just more on a general level, I think it's something to be aware of from a game developer perspective. So if you optimize for guilds or for kind of that class of player, then you also need to make sure that they're adding value back into your ecosystem in more of a I would say unique way, so that you can trace it and then reward the right kind of behavior, which was always the intention with tokens from our perspective.
Absolutely. I'd also add to that narrative point, which I think is a great one in terms of who ultimately ends up driving it, is like the purer the narrative, the easier it is for people to do that. Obviously, in the case of you guys, right, what was going on sort of in the Philippines during COVID was actually really amazing to see, right? And so when people are able to kind of, I guess, piggyback off that and sort of like pedal it, then, only further contributes to that. And then, yeah, on the guild front, I mean, definitely, we've seen a lot of folks evolve towards, again, DeFi-esque, sort of very mercenary in nature, if you like, going from project to project and kind of harvesting these things. And so that's why, again, where you can actually tie the full unlock of these in-game rewards to like much more meaningful sort of like gameplay actually and in-game activity, then you can try and prohibit some of this stuff. But the playbook's definitely not quite written right, and we're still figuring all this stuff out.
Yeah, going off all that, you mentioned 10K, PFP, NFTs, and narrative. And I actually see a lot of game developers starting with an NFT collection. And my intuition is that it just they're still controlling their narrative, and it's all about crypto. What do you kind of think about games that launch NFTs as a strategy before their game actually launches?
I think it's funny because a lot of PFP collections try to pivot into game development when they're not game developers and they have no idea how much effort it takes. And then suddenly they get valuations that are tech company-wise. So to me, it doesn't really necessarily make sense. I think as a brand, like building a brand, like a trans IP brand type, where you have maybe some movies potentially in the future, and then other game companies building stuff with the IP. That does make sense, but for that initial studio to build out those games, it's very, very difficult. I think there are some guys who might be doing it right, like there might be hiring other studios to build for them. I think that makes sense. But overall, a little bit bearish on that thesis. I think the more utility you generally add to NFTs, the more people expect, right? So. From me, I actually prefer investing or buying art assets that don't have any utility because I feel like the moment you add more utility, it's easier to make a mistake, right? Because let's say that you are issuing a passive type of token to the NFT holders, right? Okay, suddenly now you need to make utility for that passive, that ERC20 that's being released, and then you're on this content treadmill. It's very similar to actually being live operating a game, only you don't have a game, you just have a community, and you just have them on Discord. So you need to keep entertaining those guys and making more content. It's really, really difficult. So more bullish on just having that non-utility based NFT.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Would sort of suggest that it's not like fundamentally a sort of a good or a bad thing. It definitely, again, depends on sort of proximity to actual tangible deliverable. I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously, CryptoPunks and stuff, like this kind of 10K PFP convention has emerged, but there's sort of no reason that should be the case. I guess it's just the done thing now. But beyond that, right, like if you do these kind of raises, it can actually be a very attractive source of capital to developers if done at the right time, and afford the community, sort of upside in the game, however that manifests, right? Like, sort of similar to like a Founder's Pass or one of these like limited editions you might buy of a traditional game, and you might have beyond just cosmetics and the typical stuff. You might, it might be a marginal sort of efficiency or like incremental value add, but the idea is that you actually have sort of material utility in perpetuity throughout that game world. So I'm not opposed to the idea. I do like it. I just think it needs to be timed properly, and ideally you actually have something not just on the distant horizon that's playable with them.
Yeah.
I think I want to touch a little bit on utility and immutability of assets, and especially related to NFTs, right? So some of the feedback that we're getting is, okay, Axie game characters, they're NFTs, but we update, right? We are changing things inside the game. Basically one asset can be strong one day and then potentially be weaker the other day. And then people might have, especially in the Web3 space, they might be like, oh, well, I own this asset. Does that not mean that I should have, should be as strong as it was, potentially, right? So from a game developer perspective, we try to balance out the economy for the greater good, I should say. And that is something that we try to communicate outwards all the time. But sometimes, especially on the Web3 ethos of decentralization, it gets a little bit tricky. So what I like to compare it to is similar to Magic the Gathering cards, is that you buy the card, you still own the card. It has utility inside the season or the Magic season, the standard season that's being played. And when it rotates out, you might lose that utility. I think that is going to have to be accepted also over time when it comes to some of these NFTs. We're actually now testing that out also with the new Axie Origins game, where we have runes and charms that are rotating out each season. So that the people are incentivized to buy them for those rewards in that season, and then eventually kind of they rotate out, and they need to buy new runes and charms, which then incentivizes the behavior that we want. So more burn of SOP, for example, or more spending, right?
Yeah, being fine with NFTs depreciating in value, that is like something that the crypto space hasn't really quite nailed yet. And I think it's difficult because when you're selling NFTs or tokens in the beginning to kind of bootstrap funds, there's an embedded assumption that they should make more money from it, even if it's a founder's pass. The fact that it is a financialized NFT, it starts it off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, totally. I just add that there's like, I guess, there's no world in which whatever approach you take to this is going to appease everyone, right? There are some people that like the changing meta and like being able to play the market in that respect. You kind of alluded to some of the upcoming changes in the Axie economy. Other kind of approaches we've seen, like crypto unicorns from Laguna Games have made it so that you're effectively, if you're not continually engaging with your asset, then you're like significantly disadvantaged. And so, you know, it varies in approach. As I say, not everyone's going to be pleased with kind of like every way each economy is structured, but I think that's part of the fun of the time we're in, right? Is like figuring out which models appeal to who and sort of like which genres and sort of implementations make the most sense.
I think initially when we released some of the rare Axie assets, which actually Delphi helped, I guess, root invest in, if you can call it that, we have some assets in Axie that are incredibly rare. There's an origin type of class, and within that class there are subclasses called Mystic Axies, which are kind of follow the triple threat principle that we have. So they have scarcity, right? There is a set amount, maximum amount. They have utility inside the game. They're supposed to be able to earn a little bit more or be a little bit stronger. And they also have, they're aesthetically pleasing. I think, for example, in the crypto unicorn situation where they might remove some of the scarcity aspect to experiment, to me that's very interesting. But I'm not as bullish on particularly that. I think from a crypto native perspective, I'm like, oh, but I like that things are scarce. I like holding the very rare assets because it gives me pleasure.
For sure, time will tell. And if you start messing with our Axie collection, we'll be pissed off. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like when people talk about crypto gaming, and I hear this a lot in pitches as well, people like to point at Axie, but I feel like they actually miss a lot of how you guys are evolving. What do you think people generally miss about Axie?
Yeah, I kind of touched a little bit on it. It's related to the Axie Classic game that we released early in 2020. So I'm getting a little bit tired that people are judging the future of the game on something that we did 2.5 years ago, when there's been significant traction and development since then. I mean, overall, we've built out an entire operating platform and a distribution platform, which is called the Mavis Hub, similar to Steam, except that it's only focused on blockchain type of games, and then particularly on the mobile front. Like, we believe that the next billions of players will potentially come from the global south, and that they will be onboarded to crypto through gaming. And that's been the thesis, I guess, since the beginning. But when you suddenly become the biggest, you get a target on your back, and it's fine. We just keep building and we just keep developing, and then shipping the game, and then we'll see, I guess, what the true legacy will be in the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have relatively little patience with people that rock up late and start sort of pointing fingers. I think it takes like grit and bravery to do things that haven't been done. I think the Axie team have been, what a roller coaster it's been over the last few years. Like the fact that everyone still heads down and there's so much to look forward to in that ecosystem, I think should be commended. And yeah, to Alex's point, like. It's not like the team's deaf to feedback around the economy and the game and stuff. Like there are a number of improvements being made on various fronts that remedy a lot of those issues. And I think it's again like sort of a learning process for everyone that's interested in this industry. I think we've got a long road ahead. If it's going to have the impact that we think it will, and so I think that kind of energy is not so welcome.
Yeah, I mean we started out believing that the best way to learn something is by doing it. That's just how easy it is. And so, yeah, from my patience is very low for armchair quarterbacks that come with feedback. Oh, you should just have done this. In reality, like if you look at the situation at the time when things were released, given the information that a party might have had, I'm pretty proud of the decisions that we made. And I think we would do most of them, again, of course, security aspects, probably should have focused a little bit more on it. Getting out of that one is a pretty big one. But yeah, overall looking back, I'm proud of how we've handled things so far.
Yeah. What would you say are some of the decisions that you might regret or mistakes that you might want to change?
Yeah, I mean, so, of course, when you are trying to or when you're developing things on the bleeding edge, like literally you're creating games no one has ever made before you, using technology that hasn't been battle tested to the limits that you're pushing them, then trade-offs need to be made. Looking back at it, I wish that we had been more focused on security, of course. Like, I think everyone who's in this room should take a step back and look into their own organizations to try to visualize what will happen if someone gets compromised. Like, zero trust should be a basic principle that everyone here is following. And for those who are not that familiar about it, basically means that assume that anyone will be compromised at one point sooner or later, and that even means yourself. So how can you move on from that if you are compromised? I think that's one of the biggest learning points that we ever had. So focusing on security is something that we have been doing for quite some time now.
Especially because even personally, everybody wants to be your own bank, but nobody wants to have the security of a bank. So it's something that's really important. Yeah. Piers, as you've been investing in this space, do you feel like you've made any mistakes or changed the way you think about the space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there were a number of things. I mean, I'll readily admit as well, like 2021 time when things were all looking very rosy, I was definitely drinking the Kool-Aid for a while. It's easy to get very enthused at where things are going. I think one of the things that I kind of had hoped, I suppose, is that in a similar way to how like traditional gaming became sort of decorrelated to markets, and like if these games are sort of like blowing up in their own right, then they might in some way be able to kind of insulate themselves from broader market forces. That was a sort of like weird thesis I held for some time, seeing how that would play out, and obviously sort of like didn't come true. I think definitely sort of I don't know, one of the things I was definitely excited about was just more established traditional IP coming into the space, and perhaps seeing what would like come for that. I think whilst we may still see that in time, I think I sort of over-anticipated the perceived like imminence of that, I guess. So yeah, those are some of the things that I wish I'd known in retrospect and could have saved some time and energy, I think.
I have an anecdotal comment related to Web2 gaming companies. So yesterday, had a longer conversation with a traditional Web2 gaming studio. Had been talking to them for some time. Of course, we talked to many different studios, see if there is an opportunity to collaborate on IP-related stuff, or if they're building games inside the blockchain gaming space. And the message was very clear, like all blockchain efforts halted indefinitely. And to me, that's very interesting. And what it tells me is that this is still early. Like, we still have the opportunity to really influence the future of the internet when it comes to the games and the products that are being shipped here. So I take that as a very bullish sign, and it's kind of following the belief that we had also early in the industry that it's going to take a long time for these guys to start believing in the business models. Even when they've seen like a breakout use case, it's like, oh, okay, well, did it work? Did it not really work? They need to see more. And what that means is for Axie and for everyone else who's here, is that there is still an opportunity to, no matter when you're like, even if you're just starting today, to potentially influence the industry and the future of the internet. So pretty bullish on that. Yeah,
for sure. I feel like my intuition is that bottoms up IP has a better chance of doing well than top down. I think games are positive sum. There can be a lot of winners. But just watching the Web3 native teams, how nimble they are and how sensitive they are to what's actually happening versus what they want to happen, I generally think bottoms-up IP I'm pretty bullish on, like Axie.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say is like, I guess one thing that took me a while to fully acknowledge is just like, especially in this crazy market and industry where everything moves at a million miles an hour, building games is really hard and takes a long time, and like the feedback loops sort of around them are, I don't know, I feel like there's a mismatch there for this sector versus what you see in the rest of the market, where you can sort of iterate and see those feedback loops so quickly. And so that's definitely one thing that I feel like many folks in the space need to sort of acknowledge and try and build some sort of patience around, like as I say, that sort of feedback loop between idea and potential established IP entering the space or whatever, or even people building their own bottoms up stuff. Like it's sort of multi-year time frames we need to be looking at this stuff on before we could have any reasonable expectation of like sort of delivery on the promise of these games.
I totally agree. And on the topic of like token economies, a lot of games kind of just release their token economy, and it's a bit more static, and there's not enough freedom to change what they've done once they've released a token or NFTs. And I think as a space, we actually need to be culturally more accepting that these things will change, or we can sync them and replace them in airdrop. Like, you could use semi-fungible tokens or just keep using different sets of NFTs or introducing them. Because I think it's almost impossible to launch a game and your token economy works just from the beginning. But that's what we expect, and then we keep trying to force that.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about communication from the founders of the gaming studios, and especially because you effectively have different type of communities, right? So you have, and here is the interesting part. When you are talking to your community of players, the tone and the information needs to be different than when you're talking to investor base players, in a sense, and then you also even have equity investors and token investors. What happens there is that you kind of muddle the entire communication so that sometimes when you're talking to the wrong people using the wrong terminology, and they get super confused. Because if you want to inform your player base about a change, they don't care too much about necessarily the same thing as the real investor base at all. So that's something that a lot of people that are in these gaming studios need to recognize, that building communities, you really need to isolate, like, what's the message that I'm sending out? Who's the target here? Who needs to know what, and why do they need to know them? When do they need to know that? And this is something that we spent a lot of time thinking about in Axie, especially when it comes to the updates that we're sending out and just how we communicate overall. And when it comes to changes for NFTs, and yeah, it's very similar to running a public company way too early.
On that topic, what would you say are some of the insights you've had into how to address and engage those different stakeholders? Like, for example, are actual players more receptive to like live streams and video updates, and are the more investor types more receptive to your blog posts you put out? How have you guys sort of viewed that?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that we're focusing a lot on for the player base itself is competition, right? And esports, and leaning into the fact that people who are competing on the leaderboards, they can earn rewards. So we are rewarding the right kind of behavior inside the game, right? Skilled gameplay versus what we might have done in the past with SLP. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, is from a game design perspective, what we try to reward, or we try to find out what kind of behavior can we reward inside our system with tokens. And when you have a game with synchronous battles between players, right, what happens here is I press the play button, and another person around the world also needs to have pressed play. We meet each other in the ladder and we battle it out, and then the winner gets a reward. What is good about rewarding that behavior? Basically, you're rewarding player liquidity. You're rewarding the fact that when I click play, I can find another opponent immediately. And that is very important in these type of kind of battle games, because if not, you end up with asynchronous battles versus a robot or something else. And when you do that, you don't get the same level of social engagement, right? So when I'm an ex-competitive gamer. When I beat someone 5 times in a row, I want to tell that person on Discord, you suck. And I think that's a very important social thing to be able to do. If you're facing up against a robot or someone else who's predetermined all of his moves, it's not as powerful as beating someone in real time, being able to emote them in the face and be like, yeah, this is, I'm better. And that is very, I think that's some behavior that we want to reward. And I think that's sometimes easy to miss inside these crypto systems, because they're like, oh, why are we rewarding SLP? It's like, no, it's a part of a bigger system. It's a part of the social fabric of the game that we are trying to create, which I think is very, a little bit of an oversight for some games. So yeah, competitive gaming for the player base specifically.
Yeah, when it comes to investors, because I think Piers, you were asking about that, I've always noticed almost like a small conflict of interest, selling tokens to investors as well as giving it to gamers. As builders and investors, do you guys have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I'll start a little bit with the thesis for the Axie Infinity shards, or the governance token. So it is kind of in the name, right? Axie Infinity shards, many shards becomes this entire big thing. And the shards in the Axie Infinity governance ecosystem basically represent a right to determine the future of the game, as it is becoming a decentralized organization sometime in the future. Now, getting to that point is going to be very difficult, because in the beginning you need a ship captain, someone to determine the route of the game, to keep developing, to keep updating it. But that is the purpose of the token. Having investors at an early stage who believe in that vision is very important, right? Because then they can help potentially vote as you are beginning that DAO journey. Now it does take a long time to do that. We've had some feedback from the community that they wish that we had been distributing more tokens to them. It's very tricky. If you do it too much, then you kind of lose firepower in the future, because every token that you are giving away to the player base is effectively marketing to an extent. So it should be considered sort of a marketing budget. And if you do it too early, you're kind of spending all the firepower that you had. So you really need to be strategic about it.
Yeah. I think last question, Piers. What are some things that you want to see in gaming that you haven't really seen yet and you want to see teams experiment more with?
Yeah, I think one of the ideas that we've come across recently that seems super interesting, and I know you guys have spent some time with them as well, is this sort of play-fi model that NOR is sort of trying to pioneer. I guess the sort of key notion there being like, we actually have a model for implementing crypto around games instead of in them. And for like competitive titles, maybe something like sort of Counter-Strike Go or whatever, we can actually massively enhance what's effectively just the sort of esports infrastructure that exists around these things. And I think that's a really interesting idea whereby you sort of flip the model on its head. Players sort of mint their player profiles as NFTs. Over time, those NFTs will sort of the metadata will sort of update and push those NFTs. So things like KDR, like maps they prefer to play, preferred weapon types and things like that. And then you can actually introduce these sort of like on-chain tournament brackets where you might have a big sponsor of like a big sort of liquidity pool or prize pool. And the really cool thing about the model they're working on is this, notion of introducing permadeath. So if you die, then NFT is actually burnt, which is pretty cool. And,
lose your NFT.
Yeah, there's a number of teams working on sort of, I guess, esports infrastructure that uses crypto, but I think this approach in particular looks really interesting, and it opens up like a lot of surface area for effectively like community modding in terms of allowing people to build different, in sort of the play-fi model, they call them meta games, but basically, different ways to gamble on and sort of speculate on the activity and kind of the core game loops. So that's definitely a model I'm excited to see come to fruition and see if, that really does stick and whether it really can sort of step esports monetization up a bit.
Yeah, I think that's time. But to wrap things up, thank you guys for your time. I think Piers has one of the strongest voices in crypto gaming, and Alex, trailblazer. So if you guys want to find them after this, I'm sure they'd love to chat. All right, thank you.
Yeah.